Welcome back to another episode of The Football Chemist, where we use data to go through football's biggest talking points without boring or confusing you with all of that technical jargon. Today we're going to have a look at whether Arsenal can win the Premier League just with headers and set pieces. Mikel Arteta's side scored 2 headed goals to win at Newcastle from behind, and it has been a constant theme of their style of play in recent seasons, leading them to fighting at the very top of the Premier League. But is this enough to win the league? And what is their plan B if all goes wrong? Let's get into it. So firstly, I just want to apologise for the lack of videos over the last few weeks. As a more eagle-eyed of you might have noticed, I have moved into a different place, and so now that I'm more settled, hopefully I can produce videos close to a weekly basis, if not every other week. But anyway, let's start the video by finding out how reliant Arsenal are on their headers. So as I mentioned earlier, they scored 2 headers in their 2-1 win against Newcastle to come from 1-0 down to get a crucial 3 points at St James's Park, something that they have rarely done in the last few years in the Premier League. And this has been a theme of their play so far this season, and as we can see here, they're the 3rd highest team in the league so far in terms of percentage of goals scored by headers this season. 5 of their 12 goals have come from headers, which is more than any other side. Newcastle and Sunderland ahead of them scored a lot fewer goals than Arsenal, so their stats could be a bit more skewed, whereas Arsenal's numbers here are significant. And we know this is a theme of play under Arteta. He likes to have big players, he likes to have tall players, and he likes to give them the opportunity to score headers. And it's been a theme of his managerial career that has taken them up to the top of the Premier League so far. Because as we can see here, starting from 18-19, which was Unai Emery's last full season, things slowly went up during Arteta's first year in 2019-20 when he came in mid-season, and then just gradually went up until the 24-25 season. And then this year, obviously it's a small sample size, so it's a bit skewed, but there's a big spike in the percentage of goals scored by headers. And not only are they scoring more goals with headers, but as you can see, their league position has also improved. There's a direct correlation here between league position and percentage of goals from headers, so clearly the style of play that Arteta has introduced is doing some good to the team and getting them up the league. Because not only are they leading the way in headers, but they're actually leading the way in corners taken this season. Yes, you'd expect the big teams to have more corners because they create more chances, but Arsenal still being top in this metric is significant, especially if you compare them to Liverpool down there with 34, or even Man City way down there with 27. So we know Arsenal like corners, and it's given them a lot of success. I mean, it got them the winner against Newcastle through Gabriel's excellent header, but it's given them a bit of a reputation being a bit of a set-piece FC. But how true is this? Well, if we compare them to Liverpool and Man City for goals for set pieces over the last few seasons, we can see that Arsenal have really extended themselves ahead of the other two. In the earlier 2 seasons here, you can see that there wasn't much to split them, even if Arsenal were slightly ahead. But the last 2 seasons, you can see that Arsenal have really extended over Liverpool and Man City. But it's less so that Arsenal are scoring more set pieces, but actually Liverpool and Man City's numbers have come down. So this could be a completely different story on why this is happening with teams challenging at the top of the Premier League. So an unusual number of goals does lead into the reputation of being a bit of a set-piece FC. But when we look at the shots from set pieces, we get a slightly different story here. So when we look at their shots, we can clearly see 2 different things here. Firstly, they're simply more clinical than their rivals. If we look back at the previous 3 seasons, we can see the numbers for shots are fairly similar between Arsenal, Liverpool and Man City. But as we saw before, Arsenal were getting a lot more goals, which means that they're just converting more chances. It's not like Liverpool and City aren't creating the chances, they're just not scoring the chances. However, the other thing we can get from this graph here is that this season, Arsenal are well ahead for shots as well as goals, which shows that they're making an active effort to score more goals from set pieces and create more chances from set pieces, as they think this is the style of play that they should use going forward. So Arsenal are clearly relying on headers and set pieces a lot. But the question is this a way of winning the Premier League, or will they come unstuck? How have previous title winners used set pieces to their advantage? So to investigate this further, I took a look at the 5 teams who have won the Premier League in the last 10 years. You've got 2 versions of Man City, the more recent version of Pep Guardiola, and the version of Pep Guardiola that won the league back in the late 2010s. You've got Slot's Liverpool, you've got Klopp's Liverpool, and you've got Antonio Conte's Chelsea way back in the 2016-17 season. So let's take a look at the headers first. So over here, I've got those 5 teams, as I said, and I've looked at the percentage of goals they scored that season, which were headers, and compared it to the overall season average for all 20 teams that season. And the first thing you can see here is that 4 of the 5 teams were below average. The only team that was above average, actually, was Liverpool, who were way above average. This was unusual, but highly effective. But Liverpool are clearly the team that are trying to buck the trend here. Arsenal could well be that team this season, and we'll wait and see whether that is true. But generally, title-winning teams score fewer headers than the league average. But what about set pieces? Let's take a look at that now. Again, you've got a similar picture where 4 out of the 5 teams are below average in terms of percentage of goals from set pieces. The only team who are above average are Chelsea, who scored more set pieces than average, also in a season where the season average was quite high, actually. And this is quite interesting for Arsenal here, because in a season where the average was very high, the team that overperformed the average went on to win the league. And as we'll see later, there are some unusual averages already so far this season. But again, if we look at the other 4 teams and the more general trend, we see that the differences are generally quite big, and there's a good reason for this. Set pieces tend to be quite unpredictable, and if you're a title-winning team, you tend to be the best team in the league, and so you want as much control in the game as possible. So you're not going to be likely to be trying to score goals from set pieces, rather from slow, intricate build-up play. So as you can see here from these 5 seasons, 80% of the time, headers and set pieces do not work. But is this season different? The early stats show that it is, because if we look at the percentage of headed goals and set piece goals over the last 10 years, you can see that it's more or less flat line for 9 out of the 10 years. If anything, there's a very slight downward trend for both headers and set pieces. But this season, there's a marked rise. Yes, it's early days, and yes, these statistics are fairly skewed because it's quite a small data pool, but I feel we are now in a point in the season where the numbers we are getting are fairly statistically significant. So do not ignore this trend that you can see here, where headed goals and set-piece goals are very much on the up. So if this is true, Arsenal and Arteta might well be ahead of the curve. But if it's not true, do Arsenal have a plan B? Do they have a second route to goal if the headers and set pieces stop working? So this is a great part of the video for me, because I can just reuse a lot of the graphics I used in my preview video for Liverpool versus Arsenal. And whilst that match may be done and dusted, there are a lot of good points in that video about Arsenal's style of play. If you want to check it out, please watch this video here. But anyway, to start off with, what we can say is Arsenal really relied on their defenders for goals and assists, a lot more than you'd expect for a top team. And this is quite evident when we look at this graph here, which shows the distribution of goals and assists per 90 throughout Arsenal's team. And as you can see here, there are a fair few goals and assists coming from centre-backs and full-backs, and fewer goals coming from the strikers or even the wingers. And whilst there's nothing wrong with this style of play, it could show that they don't really have a plan B when you consider that they have been so dependent on headers and set pieces so far this season. Because the stats this season so far show a similar trend. When we look at their main attackers and their main shot creations, what we can see here is that the leader in lots of these metrics are Ricardo Calafiori and Jurriën Timber. They're actually leading the way for goals and assists, and this is no fluke because they're also up there for their non-penalty XG and expected assists. And I've just looked at the top 6 players for most of these metrics here, and you see Calafiori and Timber in red are leading a lot of them, whilst the attackers here in white, the top 2 here are Gyökeres and Eze, are a bit further behind. And part of this is because Arsenal have rotated their attackers more. They've had injuries, such as the injuries to Saka, and on the left flank, they've rotated their players. Actually, Eze only came in the 3rd match, so there's a bit of rotation, but this is still showing a very clear trend that Calafiori and Timber, their fullbacks, are creating a lot more chances than even their midfielders or their forwards have so far this season. And this could be especially worrying for Arsenal when you consider that they struggle for expected goals. They struggled a bit last season, and so far this season, they've also struggled a bit. They're only 6th in the league so far in the XG table, and they're well behind teams like Manchester City. But crucially, they are ahead of Liverpool, so it's not all doom and gloom, because they're actually 3rd in the league for goals minus XG, which shows that they're outperforming their XG, which shows that they're more clinical. Whether this can be sustained over a long period of time is another question, but we'll see as the season pans out. Another nice thing here is that the top 8 in this graph are actually just local rivals all paired up, or not so local rivals if you're Crystal Palace and Brighton. So the reason why Arsenal might be concerned, even though their non-penalty goals minus XG is quite high, is because their raw stats, when we dig a little deeper, are still behind City and Liverpool. They were really behind City and Liverpool over the past 2 seasons. As we can see here, even though they were close with the goals, their XG was down. But the 2 that really concern me in this graph are the shots on target and the goals from the top scorer, which are both way down. They don't have a Salah, they don't have a Haaland, and whilst they signed Victor Gyökeres to address this, it's still too soon to tell whether he can be that 20-plus goal a season striker, or whether even someone like Bukayo Saka can step up to the plate should he find consistent minutes this season. Because whilst these stats are concerning, there are signs that they have made gains so far this season. As you can see from this graph here, they're a lot closer to Liverpool, definitely, and even a lot closer to Manchester City. Their shots on target is a lot better than it was before, still slightly behind Liverpool and City, but they're getting closer and they are closing that gap. And crucially, you can see they're actually first out of the three teams for goal-creating action so far this season. Yes, they're still lagging behind City for the goals from their top scorer because Erling Haaland is head and shoulders above anyone else for goals so far this season, but they are actually level with Liverpool. Their top scorers, Victor Gyökeres for Arsenal and Hugo Ekitike for Liverpool, are both on 3 goals. But the reason why Arsenal should be a bit more concerned is because Liverpool have shown that they've got more attackers and more sources of goals than Arsenal do throughout their team. This graph isn't even considering that Mo Salah and Alexander Isak are yet to find their feet for Liverpool, and should they replicate anywhere near their goal-scoring tallies last season, then they will be absolutely fine for goals, whereas Arsenal don't quite have those players who can step up and get 20-plus goals should Gyökeres falter. Because when we look at the 3 attackers that I mentioned before, we can see that Gyökeres is lagging well behind Haaland, and yes, he's pretty close to Ekitike, but it's different styles of play. Liverpool rotate their attackers a lot more. They get more attacks from the wing. You see Salah getting a lot of goals. You see even Cody Gakpo getting a lot of goals. Whereas Arsenal are trying to gear themselves to be a bit more reliant on their central striker. And Gyökeres is more similar to Haaland than he is to someone like Ekitike. And therefore, as you can see here, he's lagging well behind Haaland for the raw stats, but even the underlying stats. And even Ekitike here can say that he's outperforming his XG, whereas Gyökeres is not leading in any of these stats and is well behind Haaland, as I said before. Because we know that Arsenal's other attackers are a bit shaky, especially with their goals minus XG, because as we saw last season, their attackers really did underperform their XG. As we can see on this graph here, it's only Gyökeres and Ranieri who are significantly positive, and this is worrying for 2 reasons. Firstly, you can say that Gyökeres outperformed it because he's playing in an easier league in the Portuguese league, and the second highest player there, Ethan Ranieri, is going to see his minutes rotated a lot more this season as Mikel Arteta looks to manage the youngster to avoid any injuries. There are other attackers down here. You've got some big deficits, especially new signings, Noni Madueke and Eberechi Eze, so this is a cause for concern. However, have Arsenal closed the gap enough so that their goals from their headers and their set pieces can offset this slight deficit to the other 2 top teams in the Premier League? So in conclusion, it looks like Arsenal probably don't have a plan B should everything go wrong to win the league. Should they try and fight Liverpool and City on a traditional style of play of attack, they're not going to win the league. They are going to get outgunned by those 2. But they do have a clear edge with their headers and set pieces. And the way that the league is evolving, this could well be the difference this season. I think Mikel Arteta might be ahead of the curve with this style of play, and we've seen glimpses of that so far this season. The high number of headed goals so far this season. We've even seen a lot more long throw-ins and long balls played by teams all across the league, not just from Arsenal, and it has been quite effective so far. And these goals from headers and set pieces are very useful goals, and they can compensate for Arsenal's supposed lack of traditional goals. And come the end of the season, it could all balance out for the goals scored. And it's widely considered that Arsenal have got the best defence in the league. So if they can outscore City and Liverpool, you back them to have a very good chance of finally winning the Premier League this season. But what do you think? Can Arsenal win the league just on headers or set pieces? Or do they need to find something different in their game to finally bridge that gap and lift the Premier League trophy? Let me know what you think in the comments below and give this video a like if you liked what you've seen. Also, feel free to subscribe to this channel if you want to see more content like this, and for some short form or behind the scenes content, give us a follow on Instagram and TikTok. I'll see you next time.